She just asked a question, but what they gave her was humiliation. The dealership glistened like a jewelry box under the Texas sun. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed a lineup of machines that looked more like sculptures than cars, sleek, aerodynamic, and almost too perfect to touch. The showroom hummed with soft jazz and confidence. Sophie stepped inside wearing ripped jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and scuffed sneakers. Her long brown hair was pulled into a loose braid, and a small backpack hung from one shoulder. She looked 16, maybe 17. She was 17 and a half, actually, but no one asked. She walked up to the first display car, a silver McLaren 720S, shining like liquid steel under the lights. She stared at it for a long moment, not in awe, but in consideration. Then she turned toward the reception. A young salesman named Ethan started toward her but was quickly intercepted. "Don't bother," said a man in a navy suit with 2 white teeth. "I'll take this one." Miles Carter, sales manager, 50% commission. 100% ego, strode up to Sophie with the kind of grin you reserve for people you know you're better than. "Well, hello there," he said, voice thick with mock charm. "Let me guess. You're here for some photos with Graham." He glanced at her sneakers. "Or maybe TikTok." Sophie blinked, unsure. "No," she said quietly. "I was actually wondering about this McLaren, the silver one." Miles's grin didn't fade. It just shifted into something colder. "That car starts at 270 grand, he said slowly. "Like explaining physics to a toddler. You don't test drive a car like that. You don't even sit in it, unless you've got insurance paperwork in one hand and bank clearance in the other." "I wasn't asking for a test drive," Sophie replied. "Just wanted to ask a few questions." That was the moment it turned. He raised his voice slightly, just enough for nearby customers and staff to hear. "Sure," Miles said loudly. "First question, do you make 6 figures? Or are you just window shopping in a Halloween costume?" Someone snorted. Another chuckled. Sophie's ears turned red, but she didn't move. "I was hoping to buy it as a gift," she said softly. "For my brother." Miles blinked, then burst out laughing. "Oh, that's rich," he said. "What? Some kind of school project, let me guess. He just beat a video game, and you want to reward him with a McLaren." She didn't respond. He leaned in closer. "Let me give you some real advice, sweetheart. There's a used car lot about 3 blocks east Hondas. Toyotas. You'll feel right at home." Then he turned away, already waving over a middle-aged couple in a Rolex and Chanel pairing. Sophie stood still for another 5 seconds, just long enough to hear one of the clerks mutter under his breath, "These kids watch one too many TikTok motivation clips and think they're investors." She turned and walked out, no argument, no scene. As she stepped through the glass doors and into the heavy light of mid-morning, she reached into her backpack, pulled out an old flip phone, and pressed a worn-down speed dial key. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But she knew who to call, the one person who never asked her to prove her worth. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The ranch sat quiet in the late afternoon, its wooden fences stretching toward the horizon, weathered and steady like the man who built them. A storm had passed earlier that morning. The ground was still damp, the horses restless. Sophie's pickup rattled up the dirt path, dust trailing behind her like a broken sentence. She parked beside the barn and stepped out slowly, backpack slung over one shoulder. The screen door creaked open before she reached it. Jack Harper stood in the doorway, a chipped tin coffee mug in one hand and a knife in the other. He was peeling an apple with practiced calm, the blade gliding down the red skin in one unbroken spiral. He didn't say anything. Sophie stepped onto the porch, took off her shoes at the edge, and sat down across from him on the wooden bench. Still, he said nothing. She stared out at the pasture, then down at her hands, then back at him. "It was a McLaren," she said finally. "The silver one. Vate twin turbo, 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Jack didn't look up. The apple skin continued to fall into curls on the table. "I asked about it. Just asked." The knife stopped. They laughed. Jack set the blade down, picked up the mug, sipped. "They said I didn't belong there, that I couldn't even afford to sit in it." She let out a dry laugh. "One of them told me to check out the used Hondas down the street." Jack leaned back in his chair. The porch creaked. His eyes didn't flinch, but something in the way his jaw tightened spoke volumes. "I didn't tell them my name," she added. Didn't think I needed to. He looked at her for the first time, quietly, without pity. I wasn't embarrassed for me, she said, voice softer now. I was embarrassed for how easy it was for them to decide. I didn't matter. Jack nodded once, not agreement, not permission, just acknowledgement. Sophie looked at him. I didn't want you to be mad. I'm not, he said simply. She paused, waited. I'm listening. Another silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was building. Sophie reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded paper, an old sketch of a McLaren in silver crayon, drawn when she was 10. Her older brother Noah had helped her color it. Jack took it, looked at it, folded it back up without a word. Then he stood. I'll take care of it, he said, and stepped inside. She stayed on the porch, the hum of the horses in the distance. She didn't know what he was going to do, but she knew how it would feel like thunder that never needed to raise its voice. Sophie Harper never liked attention at school. She was a girl who turned in her essays early, never raised her hand unless the room was silent, and always volunteered to help clean up after the bell rang. Her teachers called her dependable. Her classmates barely remembered her name, which was fine with her. She didn't wear makeup or denim heels. Her jeans had holes, not because they were trendy, but because they'd been hers since 10th grade. She had one pair of boots she wore everywhere, a watch Jack gave her that didn't work anymore, and a sweatshirt from a rescue shelter fundraiser 3 years ago. The sleeves were too long, and she liked it that way. She didn't act like a Harper, because no one really knew what that meant outside the headlines. The Harper name wasn't loud. Jack had spent decades keeping it that way, while other veterans turned legends, wrote memoirs, or built empires. Jack built barns, donated land, taught self-defense to kids who flinched when doors slammed, and raised Sophie like the world might forget her, so she'd better remember who she was. When she was 12, she asked him why they didn't live in a mansion like the other kids on the news. Jack didn't answer at first, just kept sanding the wooden fence post until the grain was smooth under his hands. Then he said, "A big house doesn't teach you how to stand your ground," and that was that. Sophie grew up on a ranch built for work, not show. Morning started at 5:30. She fed horses, stacked hay, and knew the exact angle to swing a gate without it creaking. She learned discipline before she understood its meaning. But Jack never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The Harper Foundation, quietly one of the largest veteran support networks in the country, had been running long before Sophie was born. Most of the board didn't even know she was related. Jack never brought her to galas, never introduced her as his heir. He just brought her to rehab centers, to hospitals, to quiet conversations with men missing limbs and women missing husbands. At one center in El Paso, a man with burn scars down both arms gave her a small coin and said, "Your grandpa saved my life. But you," he looked her in the eyes, "you remind me why it was worth saving." She kept that coin in her pocket ever since. So no, Sophie didn't walk into that dealership expecting a red carpet. She didn't want to be treated like a millionaire. She didn't want them to beg for her business or bend the rules. She just wanted to ask about the car for Noah. The McLaren wasn't a toy. It was a promise. A sketch drawn with crayon when they were kids, taped to their bedroom wall. A dream from before the accident, before Noah had to relearn how to move, how to speak, how to walk. Sophie had watched him fall, had screamed until her throat broke, had prayed in silence while doctors rebuilt his spine, and now he was walking again. And she wanted to give him something that made him feel like the world hadn't stolen everything. But when she walked into that dealership, all they saw was a girl in ripped jeans, and no one ever asked her last name. Jack stood at the edge of the barn, one hand resting on a worn fence post, the other holding a mug of black coffee that had long gone cold. The wind tugged at the brim of his old hat. Horses moved lazily in the pasture, oblivious to the shift in the air. Sophie's story hadn't surprised him. What struck him was her restraint. She hadn't asked for revenge. She hadn't cursed a salesman. She hadn't demanded he fix it. She had just come home. That told him more than anything else. He took one last sip, set the mug down, and walked inside. The phone on the wall hadn't rung in years, but he still used it, still trusted it. He dialed slowly. Each number pressed like a decision. After 3 rings, a voice picked up, tight, professional. Henry Brooks speaking. Jack didn't introduce himself. "I'm interested in the McLaren 720 SS Silver." A pause. Then, "Yes, sir. We have one in the showroom, limited edition, appointment only. I'll be there tomorrow, Jack said. 10:17, sir, 10:17. He hung up. In the other room, Sophie fed the dogs. She didn't ask what he was doing. Didn't need to. Jack went to the garage out back, the .org one no one outside the family ever saw. It smelled of oil, cedar, and time. Inside was a machine that didn't belong to this decade, a 1967 Shelby GT500, rebuilt from the axles up, matte black with deep red trim. Next to it, under a tarp, rested something rarer. He pulled the cover back slowly, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight grey, extended wheelbase, custom interior. A gift from a foreign diplomat, long returned. Jack had only driven it twice. He didn't care for flash, but some lessons needed to be taught in a language others understood. He spent the evening checking tire pressure, polishing the chrome, and loading a folded envelope into the glove box. Sophie watched from the kitchen window but said nothing. He didn't offer her an explanation, only nodded once before turning off the garage lights. The next morning came like clockwork, dry air, high sun, a stillness that stretched. Jack wore a charcoal grey suit. Nothing fancy, just sharp enough to pass. His tie was black, his boots polished but still his. He never looked out of place because he never let the place define him. He stepped into the car, started the engine, and rolled down the long dirt drive in silence. 50 miles away at Boston Luxury Motors of Texas, Miles Carter was adjusting his cufflinks for the 5th time. His navy blazer hugged his frame just right, and his teeth gleamed every time he glanced in the mirror. He didn't remember the girl's name, just the incident, another Gen Z daydreamer. He'd joked the night before at the bar. Jeans full of holes, big dreams, no credit. The staff had laughed, even Henry had smirked. They had quotas to meet, clients to impress. Image was everything. At exactly 10:17 a.m., the air outside the showroom shifted. A sound, low, regal, rolled through the lot. Heads turned, phones slipped from hands. The Rolls-Royce glided to a stop like a shark through glass. It didn't belong there, and yet it owned the space. The back door opened. Jack stepped out. He didn't rush, didn't posture. He buttoned his jacket once, adjusted his cuffs, and walked toward the entrance with the ease of a man who'd walked into far worse places and lived to rebuild them. Ethan, the junior salesman, noticed something change in the air, but Miles was already moving. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, and flashed a rehearsed grin. "Welcome, sir," he called. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors." Jack stepped in slow. "I'm here about the McLaren," he said. "Oh, excellent choice. Excellent," Miles said. "We're actually showing it to a client later today, but if you'd like, I can schedule." Jack stopped walking. "I believe you told my granddaughter she wasn't even worth a brochure." The color drained from Miles's face. Ethan dropped his pen behind the desk. Jack didn't raise his voice, didn't look angry, just still. "Today," he said, "you will learn the difference between value and appearance." And without waiting for a reply, he stepped past the threshold. The silence followed him inside. The showroom had gone quiet, not because anyone told it to, but because something about the man who had just walked in didn't fit the script. Jack Harper moved like time owed him something. Miles tried to recover his rhythm, stepping quickly into position with the confidence of someone used to selling fantasies. "Mr. Harper," Jack said. Miles extended his hand. Jack didn't take it. "I understand you're showing the McLaren today." Miles blinked. "Yes, sir. We have a few interested buyers lined up. High-profile clients, of course. Appointments only. But if you'd like to leave your information, I'm not here for a slot," Jack said evenly. "I'm here because my granddaughter was here yesterday. She asked about that McLaren." Miles tilted his head slightly, as if trying to mask confusion behind a smile. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not sure I recall. She's 17, Jack continued. "Jeans, Dwight t-shirt, backpack. You told her she wasn't worth your time." Ethan, standing behind the reception desk, went still. Miles's grin began to falter. "Oh, that yes. I think I may remember someone fitting that description. But I assure you, we get walk-ins all the time. You understand, we have to qualify leads." Jack took one step closer. "No," he said. You don't have to qualify people. You have to respect them. The words were soft, but they landed like a door slamming shut in an empty room. Miles chuckled, trying to lighten the air. I think this is all a bit of a misunderstanding. She didn't look like someone in the market for a high-performance vehicle. And in this line of work, you have to filter daydreamers from decision-makers. You know how it is. Jack raised an eyebrow. Do I? A beep sounded behind Miles. 2 other salesmen had stopped pretending to be busy. Jack turned casually, walking toward the McLaren. The car sat on its elevated platform like a crown jewel, polished, gleaming, untouched. He ran a hand along its curve, slowly. This was her brother's dream, Jack said, not to anyone in particular. He had a sketch of it on their bedroom wall when they were kids. Then life hit hard. He turned back to Miles. She came here not to impress you, not to get a photo. She came because she wanted to give something back to someone who lost everything. Miles's voice was thinner now. Look, I didn't mean to offend anyone. I treat all potential buyers with the same level of professionalism. Number you don't, Jack said. That stopped everything. Even the manager, Henry Brooks, had stepped out of his office by now, drawn by the silence more than the words. Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather case. He opened it. Inside was a small circular medallion, silver-edged, matte black, center, the Harper Foundation seal. He handed it to Miles. Miles stared, confused. Jack waited. Henry stepped forward, looked down, and froze. His voice was quiet now. Mr. Harper, I didn't know. Jack looked at him. No, you didn't bother to. Then, just loud enough for the room to hear, you judged my granddaughter the moment she walked in. Let's see how well you recognize value now. For a long moment, no one moved. Miles held the medallion like it might burn him. Jack didn't press. He just let the silence do the work. Then, from behind the counter, Ethan stepped forward. His voice was quiet but clear. I remember her, he said. Miles turned sharply. Ethan, I remember everything. Ethan continued, his face pale but steady. She asked politely about the car. You cut her off. Told her to check out the used lot. And when she tried to speak again, you laughed at her. Miles's jaw tightened. Ethan, this isn't your... She didn't deserve that, Ethan said. Louder now. No one does. The silence shifted again, not tension now, just weight, like the room had become heavier somehow. Jack turned slightly toward the young salesman. What's your name? Ethan Reyes, sir. Jack nodded once. Thank you. Ethan. He looked back to Henry Brooks, who was now standing as still as a statue. I'm not here to ruin your business, Jack said, but I came to see what it's really built on. Henry tried to compose himself. Mr. Harper, if we'd known, you'd have smiled wider, Jack interrupted, and handed her a brochure. He took a slow breath. I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in what happens next. He turned his gaze back to Miles. You judged my granddaughter based on how she looked, so I'm giving you a chance to see what real worth looks like. Miles tried to speak. Nothing came. Jack continued, steady as ever. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. There's a bus leaving for the Harper Veteran Center outside Kerrville. You'll be on it. 1 month. No suits. No sales talk. Just service. Miles blinked. I have obligations. My position. Jack cut him off with just a look. You don't have to go, he said calmly. But you should know I came here ready to buy. Not just the McLaren, I was considering a full fleet order for the Foundation's donor program. 7 vehicles. Possibly more. Henry exhaled audibly. Jack raised an eyebrow. Of course. If this place can't distinguish respect from revenue, Henry jumped in. He'll go. Miles will go, and we'll be reviewing our internal protocols immediately. Jack nodded once, then turned back to Ethan. I want you to handle the purchase, he said. My granddaughter will be by next week to finalize it. Treat her like any other client. Ethan looked stunned. Of course, sir. I'd be honored. Jack handed him a folded sheet of paper from his jacket specs, and a note from her. It's his favorite color. Ethan took it gently, like it might fall apart if handled wrong. And just like that, Jack turned and began walking toward the exit. As he passed the McLaren, he stopped for a second, ran his hand once more along the body. My granddaughter didn't ask for special treatment, he said without turning around. She asked to be heard. He stepped outside. The showroom stayed silent long after the door closed behind him. The door shut behind Jack Harper with a soft thud. Inside, it echoed like a gunshot. No one spoke. No one moved. The McLaren still gleamed under the lights, untouched, but it looked different now, smaller, maybe less impressive. Miles stood rooted in place, medallion still in his hand, like it might explain everything if he just stared hard enough. His mouth was slightly open. Words wouldn't come, but none would carry weight here anymore. Henry Brooks broke first. He turned sharply toward Miles, voice low and dangerous. "What were you thinking?" Miles blinked. "I didn't know who she was. That's the point." Henry snapped. "You didn't care." Ethan stood by the reception desk, still holding the folded paper Jack had given him. His hands trembled slightly. He hadn't spoken since. A customer who'd been pretending to examine a Bentley slowly walked out the door, casting a long glance at Miles as he passed. The silence thickened again, but this time it wasn't awe, it was shame. One of the salesmen, Eli, the youngest on the team, whispered to another, "I heard about the Harper Foundation last year. Didn't know that was him. Didn't know he was still alive," came the reply. Miles swallowed hard. He looked at Henry. "What am I supposed to do?" "You heard the man," Henry said. 8 a.m. tomorrow. That bus better have your name on it." "I run this floor," Miles said, voice barely audible. "I have clients, appointments." "Not anymore," Henry interrupted coldly. Across the room, Ethan unfolded the paper slowly, as if it were sacred. It was handwritten in neat, curved lines, a simple list of car specs followed by a short note. "Noah likes silver best." Not flashy, just fast enough to feel alive. Ethan looked up, something changing behind his eyes. "I'd like to call her," he said, "just to confirm delivery details." Henry nodded. "Do it." Miles turned away, staring out the showroom windows. The sun glared back at him, indifferent. He'd made a career out of recognizing power the moment it walked through the door, and today he'd failed, not because he didn't see it, but because it came dressed in denim and dignity. And he wasn't trained to recognize either. That night, Miles couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed in his downtown apartment, the skyline blinking in muted neon through the window. His suit jacket still hung over the chair, untouched since he got home. The medallion from the foundation sat on the nightstand, cold and heavy. He had Googled Jack Harper, not the movie clips, not the jokes, the real part. Articles about the foundation, stories from veterans, quiet interviews with families who spoke his name with reverence. There were no billboards, no ads, just results people he'd never heard of calling him a silent giant. Miles looked down at his hands. He couldn't remember the last time they'd done something that wasn't about a sale. At 7:43 a.m., he stood on the curb outside a small parking lot west of downtown. The bus was already there, white, plain, with a Harper Foundation emblem painted on the side. A few others waited nearby, one man in a wheelchair with military pins on his jacket, a woman with a prosthetic arm flipping a coin between her fingers. No one spoke. Miles wore jeans and a grey t-shirt per the instructions, no logos, no jewelry. His watch felt wrong on his wrist, so he left it behind. He clutched a duffel bag, mostly empty. He didn't know what to pack. What do you bring when you've never built anything real? At 7:59, the driver, a man in his 60s with a face like worn leather, nodded once. Boarding. Miles stepped on, took a seat near the back, tried not to look out of place, failed. As the engine rumbled to life, he caught sight of his reflection in the window. The man looking back didn't smirk, didn't calculate, just stared. The drive took nearly 2 hours, past the city, through winding roads, into a part of Texas he'd never cared to notice. The center itself was tucked behind hills and pines, low buildings, wide walkways, gardens full of raised beds and wheelchairs. There were no signs that screamed rehab, no security cameras, just quiet order. Jack wasn't there, of course not. Miles was met by a man named Reuben Broadshoulders, quiet voice, half his face marked with scar tissue. "You'll be assigned a rotation," Reuben said. "Meals, cleanup, assistance." Miles nodded, tried not to stare at the scars. "You speak only when spoken to. You don't lecture, you listen." "Understood." Reuben looked him over. "Doubt it. But that's why you're here." He handed Miles a name tag. It just said, Miles, no title, no last name. His room was small, 2 beds. One already made, the other waiting. A folded t-shirt sat on the pillow, stamped with the words "Earn it daily." Miles sat down slowly. Outside the window, someone was laughing, a deep, honest kind of laugh he hadn't heard in years. It startled him. He looked down at his hands again. For the first time in a long time, they felt empty and maybe ready. The first week nearly broke him. Miles scrubbed floors, loaded trays, sorted supplies. No one cared about his resume. No one asked about his sales numbers. He was given tasks, not titles. On the third day, a veteran named Terrell, double amputee, quick with sarcasm, asked if Miles was lost. "You look like you took a wrong turn at valet parking." Miles tried to laugh. "Just here to help." Terrell narrowed his eyes. "We'll see." It wasn't the labor that wore him down. It was the stillness, the moments between helping a man button a shirt with trembling fingers, holding a coffee cup steady for someone who couldn't anymore, listening to stories that started mid-sentence and ended with long silences. There were no deals to close, no image to manage, just presence. By week 2, Miles stopped checking his phone, not because he meant to. He simply forgot. In the garden, he met Thomas, a 9-year-old with cerebral palsy whose father was undergoing rehab inside. Thomas had a wheelchair tricked out with flame decals and a horn that sounded like a goat. He was also brutally honest. "You're too slow," he told Miles as they played modified basketball with a soft foam hoop. "And your throw is garbage." Miles grinned. "Coaching already?" Thomas shrugged. "You need it." By the end of the session, Miles was laughing, not for show, not politely, but because something had cracked open and air was finally getting in. Reuben, the scarred supervisor, watched from afar. He didn't say much, just nodded one morning and handed Miles a volunteer badge, this time laminated. "You're staying longer than most." Miles looked down at it. "I think I need to." Reuben said nothing, just walked away. That night, Miles sat by himself near the flagpole. The wind was sharp, the stars clearer than he remembered. He thought of the dealership, the suits, the silence in Jack's voice, and the girl who never raised hers. He realized something that made his stomach turn. She had walked away with dignity. He had been left with shame, and somehow he was grateful for it. The ballroom at the Austin Grand was lit with gold and soft music. Crystal chandeliers swayed gently above rows of round tables draped in navy and silver. The Harper Foundation Gala wasn't a red carpet event. It was a thank you children with mobility aids, veterans in dress blues and faded jeans, families leaning into one another. Miles stood by the guest entrance, wearing a dark grey shirt with no logo, no name tag, just helping folding chairs, moving gear, refilling water. Thomas found him near the refreshment table. "You clean up okay?" the boy said. Miles smiled. "You say that like it's a surprise." "It is." Nearby, Sophie arrived with Jack. She wore a soft blue dress, hair tied back simply. She didn't glide into the room. She just walked, normal, unassuming. But people noticed her now, and not because of who she was related to, but because of how she carried herself. Miles saw her. She saw him, and nodded once. He nodded back, no words exchanged, just two people on opposite ends of a hard lesson. Later that night, as the crowd settled, Jack stood on stage for only 60 seconds. He didn't give a speech. He said, "Sometimes the quietest people teach us the loudest things." Then he stepped back into the crowd, disappearing into the quiet. The loading dock behind the ballroom was quiet. Sophie stood there, arms crossed, letting the breeze undo parts of her braid. Miles approached slowly. She didn't turn. "I wanted to say something," he began. She waited. "I was wrong about you, about everything. And I'm sorry. I wasn't just rude. I was small." Sophie turned now. Her eyes weren't angry, just tired. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I do. Because if people like me keep acting like that, then people like you keep having to fight harder just to be seen." Sophie considered this. "You listened," she said. "That's rare. I'm still listening," Miles said. She smiled faintly. "Good. Then keep doing that for the next one." Miles nodded. "I will." They didn't shake hands, didn't hug. She walked back inside, and Miles stayed outside a little longer, staring up at a sky that no longer felt so far away. A month later, the Harper Foundation installed a new plaque in their main center, not a memorial. A message etched in brushed steel: "Respect first. Always." Ethan was there that day, standing beside Sophie, holding a small clipboard with specs for a new delivery van Jack had just donated. "We're getting better at this," he said. Sophie nodded. Little by little, inside the dealership, everything looked the same, but everything felt different. Miles was no longer the manager he didn't want to be. He had taken a different role, training new hires on client relations, not how to sell, how to see. Ethan had been promoted, and the McLaren. It now lived in a quiet garage outside town, covered most days, only driven on weekends when Noah was strong enough to sit behind the wheel. The first time he saw it, he cried not because of the car, but because someone remembered his dream. At a small table near the corner of the dealership, Jack sat with Henry, no suit, just his boots, his quiet eyes, and a short list of vehicle needs for the Foundation's fleet. Henry finished reading and cleared his throat. "So, we're back in business." Jack looked at Ethan across the room. "He's earned the right to close it." Henry nodded. "And Miles, he's still learning." "That's enough." Jack stood, adjusted his jacket, and turned toward the exit. On the way out, a young trainee nodded at him. Jack nodded back. As the glass doors opened, the sun spilled across the floor. Sophie stood just outside, hands in her jacket pockets. He joined her. They didn't say a word, didn't need to. And as they walked away calm, certain, the whole room turned without knowing why. Because respect never announces itself, but when it enters a room, everyone hears.